Well, I just want to thank Commissioner Geoffrey Starks for joining us today. The commissioner has been at the FCC for a couple of years now, and he is really at the forefront of affordability, communications technology, and ensuring that all Americans can get connected. He has an impressive resume. Before he became commissioner, he was leading an important team at the FCC for the Enforcement Bureau. He also has been at the Department of Justice, Williams and Conley, clerked for one of the circuit courts, and has gone to two really prestigious schools, both Harvard and Yale. So it's just an honor to have you back. The commissioner was with us at our trade show in the fall, and we're really excited to hear about what's going on at the FCC with the change in the administration. So I want to welcome him. He's going to give a few remarks, and then we'll move into questions. Thank you, Commissioner.
Yes, as always, so glad to join you, Angie, and of course, thanks to Chip and the entire INCOMPAS team, for inviting me to join you at this year's Policy Summit. I, of course, recognize we're all gathering at a trying time for many of us, for many of you. And for competitive carriers, like many small businesses around the country, the coronavirus pandemic has created a still unfolding series of challenges, from caring to loved ones, to, of course, navigating economic headwinds, working with customers who are facing their own difficulties. And so many of you have worked hard to keep your communities connected over the last year. And from my perch as a commissioner, I thank you. And so early in the pandemic, many of us recognized how critical home broadband access was going to be to our COVID response. And so months of staying home has meant taking many of those daily activities online, work, school, medical care, connecting with those loved ones in ways that are meaningful. And so even before the pandemic and the economic devastation it has caused, tens of millions of Americans did not have that adequate home broadband connection. And that inequality is making so many existing inequities even worse. For just one example, seniors all over the country without broadband access and experience are having a tough time navigating some of the digital bureaucracies and are struggling. We are reading more and more to sign up for scarce COVID-19 vaccine appointments. And so our longstanding digital divide has truly morphed into a monstrous COVID-19 divide. And let us also speak plainly. In 2021, Black Americans and other people of color are still, by a wide margin, significantly less likely to have home broadband connections than their counterparts. And this cannot stand. We can no longer defer the hard work on digital equity and believe that a future group and future time will solve this issue. This is the time, now is the moment. And so when we focus on broadband in America, as we must, we should focus on the smoldering front that communities of color constitute in our battle against internet inequality. And as we look towards that shared future, an unprecedented crisis and an unparalleled opportunity, leaving households disconnected will hurt our ability to rebuild the economy and our workforce, diminish our ability to keep Americans and our healthcare system safe by advancing telemedicine. And it will, of course, dim the educational horizon of our young learners everywhere who fall further and further behind. And so with widespread vaccinations on the horizon, we are all beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. But we also know, as the president and his medical advisors have emphasized, we still have many challenging months ahead. And so it brings me to what my top priority for the coming weeks is going to be, and that is getting the Emergency Broadband Access Program to as many Americans as possible. Late last year, Congress created a $3.2 billion emergency broadband benefit for low-income families. The goal is to connect those low-income households, especially those households with school-age children, to the connected devices and broadband networks at affordable rates that we know they need. And Congress created several eligibility criteria broader than our existing Lifeline program to ensure that this program was going to reach those most in need during this COVID crisis. And I have great expectations for this program. If we are successful, the emergency broadband benefit will reach more disconnected low-income people and households of color than any previous FCC effort to close the digital divide. But Congress has, quite reasonably so, given us just 60 days to set up the program, and so there are lots of details to work out. And I'm focusing most immediately on two of them. First, how will we get the word out? As many of you know, I've long been exasperated by the poor job the FCC has done in recent years to get the word out about the Lifeline program. Only about 20% of Lifeline eligible households actually subscribe to the program. And for the emergency broadband benefit to succeed, we're going to need to do much better. And that means a broad, collaborative outreach effort that must coordinate across the federal government and also include state and local governments, broadband providers, nonprofits, philanthropy, educators, direct service providers. I've heard from many of these organizations, including INCOMPAS, that are thinking and planning on how to get involved. And I'm eager to support and amplify their efforts. The second issue is encouraging broadband providers. Many of you watching today hopefully will participate. Last year, I was heartened by the large number of providers that participated in the Keep America Connected pledge, often at great expense, I know. And many of you are actively working to help your communities get through this difficult time. The emergency broadband benefit should expand, extend, and amplify those efforts. And so my commitment to you is that I'll work to make sure the rules are as clear and simple as possible, and that the Commission answers your questions quickly. If you have concerns that might prevent your company from participating, I urge you to reach out to the Commission, to my team in particular, as soon as possible so that we can work to alleviate any unnecessary hurdles. We need you to be a part of this national effort. And so making the emergency broadband benefit work well will make a huge difference to many families. And I'm also mindful that this is a temporary solution as of now and not a long-term solution, although it's a long-term problem. Internet inequality has held millions of Americans back from their full potential long before the COVID-19 crisis. In recent years, the FCC has focused almost exclusively on rural development. And now I'm from Kansas. And so I agree and know that expanding rural infrastructure is a critical part of addressing internet inequality. But Census Bureau surveys show that nearly 3 times as many households in urban areas remain unconnected as well. And for example, in Detroit, Michigan, close to half the population lacks broadband access. In that city alone, approximately 29,000 students in particular lack access to adequate broadband services, a startling figure which demonstrates the urgent need for connectivity. And so many communities are working tirelessly to close the digital divide, and they should know that help is on the way. Before the pandemic, I visited Montgomery and Selma, Alabama. I had the chance to sit down with the Selma mayor to discuss what his historic treasure of a city needed to continue developing and rebounding, and we had a great dialogue. But most importantly, I met with members of the Selma Public Housing Authority, who have a special project there to get people living in low-income housing free broadband and a tablet. And so I'll never forget when I met a single mother of 3 who lived in the George Washington Carver homes and benefited from that program. She was truly a living example of the power of broadband to transform lives. She told me with great pride how an at-home broadband access service enabled her to complete her assignments for her online degree, while her children also were able to finish their homework, all without requiring her to make those trips that we all too often hear of to the local library or to a restaurant to find that adequate connection. And so we need to bring that transformative experience to millions more households beyond the emergency broadband benefit. There are a couple of concrete steps that the Commission, I think, should be taking. First, Lifeline does need an update. As I noted earlier, only about 20% of the eligible households take advantage of the benefit. And I propose that the Commission enter into MOUs, memoranda of understanding, with other federal agencies that administer the programs with similar eligibility criteria. Ideally, if somebody is enrolled in a qualifying program like SNAP, they should learn about Lifeline. We also need to better understand what works and what doesn't. The Commission has never completed its planned study of the program. We need to do this so that Lifeline can be better updated to reflect today's needs. Because the point is that if somebody is on and having food insecurity, they are likely having digital insecurity. Second, we need to make sure that the FCC's investments in infrastructure lead to service that American families can actually afford. Our controlling statute here is explicit that quality services should be available at just, reasonable, and affordable rates. And so if we're using our finite funds to build out broadband infrastructure without regard given to whether people can afford the service once it arrives, we have not completely done the job assigned to us by Congress. And so I was the first on the Commission to call for consideration of requiring USF recipients to provide an affordable option as they consider in a condition of receiving high-cost support. So I'm eager to work with stakeholders around the country to incorporate some of those lessons of affordability and the challenges in the long-term commitment of our universal service high-cost program. Third, we do need to update our E-rate program with badly needed flexibility. For too long, our ability to respond to the educational challenges posed by COVID-19 has been hamstrung by the previous administration's crabbed interpretation of the E-rate statute. I'm glad that the Commission began the process of correcting that error. Giving schools flexibility to spend the funds to support students who are required to learn at home is an important step for the current school year, where many students continue to distance learn. Making this change will also make the program ready for future extenuating circumstances, from other potential health crises to natural disasters and more. It's taken far too long for E-rate to meet this moment, and we need to make sure it's better prepared for the future. And so finally, I'm eager to work with congressional leaders to expand the Commission's ability to respond to the affordability challenge. Congress should build on the bipartisan support for the emergency broadband benefit, accelerate efforts to make broadband more affordable. The Accessible, Affordable Internet for All Act, for example, included many of these ideas and an infusion of funding. That legislation, of course, would codify what I just spoke about, requiring that providers that receive USF high-cost funding provide consumers with an affordable option, but it would also require that study on the extent to which affordability contributes to the lack of broadband adoption. These are some of the many ideas that I think and I hope will get a thorough hearing in the coming months. And so to close, it was, of course, the late Congressman John Lewis who said that access to the internet is the civil rights issue of the 21st century. This challenging year across our country has brought internet inequality to the forefront of our technology and telecommunications policy discussions. And so let's keep it there. No family should have to decide between keeping the lights on or getting that household connected. And no family should miss out on the benefits of broadband because of cost. And so I do look forward to working with all of you to make universal, high quality, affordable broadband a true reality. So thank you for the time and deeply appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Commissioner. We really appreciate your dedication and your passion for these issues. As you well noted, they're very important so that every American has opportunity and no one gets left behind.
Yeah.
You know, it's been an honor talking to you and your team about the emergency broadband benefit, which is clearly intended to be a temporary benefit. And you're working to make sure as many providers as possible participate. Any further thoughts on what we here at INCOMPAS should be doing to help encourage more participation? You know, we rallied our troops around the Keep Americans Connected Pledge. In fact, we were the first trade association to commit to the Keep Americans Connected Pledge. And almost every single one of our service provider members, you know, also took the pledge, which we're really proud of, including ones that just serve businesses. So it's really important, you know, for both residences and businesses. But what more can we do besides the pep rallies that we, you know, have once a week with our members to encourage them? And then any thoughts too about what else the commission could do to answer the questions that providers may have about this process.
Yes, thank you for the question, Angie. And again, Encompass should be have a hearty pat on the back for the hard work that you all did in keeping communities connected through the pandemic. It really does take all of us working together to make sure that so many Americans are seeing their way through this tough time. And so, with regard to the program, I think Encompass, of course, is doing the right things and engaging with me, with my office, with my team, with the commission, I think is for sure what has to happen right now. The two platforms, the two planks that are really going to drive this program are, one, having as many providers as possible sign up for the program, and then two, making sure that we sign up as many participants and people that need this benefit as possible. And so it's quite simple when you put it that way, and there's a lot of execution that we're going to need to do. Obviously, the reply comments are due February 16th, and so I would encourage Encompass, other folks, as I kind of nibbled at in my remarks just a moment ago, this is one of those programs where we are moving with a very quick burn on a $3.2 billion program. Our universal service program annually is about 10. So that kind of gives you a sense of the magnitude of how much money there is here, but also just in a 60-day, it's a very quick burn. And so making sure that if there are any problems, my mother would always say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. And so if there are things here on the front end while we're setting up the program, if there are things that we need and hurdles and roadblocks we need to clear to make sure that we have as many providers and participants as possible, a little bit of a forethought here is going to go a long way. So I would continue you, Encompass, and your members to continue to think hard, especially while we are setting this thing up, because it's going to be big, that we all work together to make sure that we have the benefit that is going to help, at the end of the day, really help these struggling American households that we know need connectivity.
Yeah, and thank you. And the staff has been fantastic to work with. Some of the issues that we raised with you, we've raised with them. They were very appreciative. I know they've got their hands full and they're reading comments and having meetings. It's our hope that there'll be a big push with the staff and with USAC to educate the providers, especially those who've not previously participated in the Lifeline program, the things that they could be doing now to make it easier for their approval process and for their communications with USAC's databases to participate in the program. And, it's down in the weeds details, not things that people usually want to hear at a conference, but, there's a lot of hard work going into it, and from your team and from the Bureau, and we want to thank you for that.
Great.
Everybody has just been incredibly welcoming to hearing the ideas that Encompass, as well as a number of other trade associations and providers have been offering. So thank you for that.
Good. Let's keep up the good work.
You mentioned Majority Whip Clyburn's Internet for All Act. And, that seems like a real potential to take the EBB and make it more permanent solution for those who are experiencing the divide because they can't afford home access. Any thoughts that you have about, what can be done to help ensure its passage, and then how the FCC might be able to navigate from moving from a temporary emergency program to a more permanent program? So I would just welcome your thoughts on that.
Yeah, my real thought is that the best thing that we can all do, again, collaboratively, holistically, is to have a great and effective EBB that is rolled out right now. The best thing we can all do for ourselves to make the need, I think, is very clear, which is why Congress acted on this. But if we can set up a program that does reach those households, does have robust providers and participation, I think we are going to really see just the real impact that we're going to make here. And so the best thing truly that we can all do to make sure that this has that glide path to a more permanent solution is to make sure we get this thing right now. and make it clear how powerful and impactful that benefit is, and then we'll continue, as many of us are, on the dialogue with the Hill on making this a more permanent program.
Yeah. The other opportunity that you mentioned that has just recently been public noticed is using E-rate dollars to provide service to students and teachers who remain disconnected. So that's a really exciting opportunity. What are your thoughts about what that process is going to look like at the FCC? Timing? Do you see it just hand in hand with EBB? And then how does the commission coordinate between the two programs in terms of making sure that the dollars are stretched as far as possible and that both programs are run efficiently?
Yeah, I think these are all critical questions. You know, the public notice that was just put out, I think also has a very quick turnaround. I want to say February 16th, February 16th for initial comments, February 23rd for replies. And so that also is moving quickly. You know, it's probably worth a conversation for another day. But again, I alluded to it earlier that, you know, the prior administration, I thought, had a very constrained view of what E-rate can and needs to do. I think there is a difference in our world here today, and how I think about it. I've been very clear publicly that the E-rate program needs to meet the moment and better support what are classrooms right now, which are in many instances folks' homes and kitchen tables, and a room that is trying to be cordoned off right now. And even as we, of course, see nationwide that schools are thinking through, and in some cases trying to get back to in-person, those are frequently also just partial. There are hybrids here. And so we absolutely still need to keep our eye on the ball that supporting our young learners, especially through the E-rate program, is going to continue to be very important. And so I feel very strongly that we're going to need to make sure that E-rate is effectuated and executed to help more learners through this pandemic.
You know, Commissioner, you have just hit the nail on the head, where students may be going back to school, but if they get contact traced, then they need to be quarantined at home. And that actually happened in my family, where we all had to quarantine.
Right.
And our son, who has been experiencing a 50% schedule, needed to just go back to 100% from home. And so having the connection at home was really important. And we have a robust connection. So he could do school, my husband and I could both work, we could all quarantine together. Luckily, we did not turn out to be positive. But that was really key. And I have in my family a number of teachers, and where they're 100% at school, but there are students who are getting contact traced and then having to leave school, go through the quarantine. And if they don't have a connection, then they have no ability to keep up with the schoolwork in real time. And at a disadvantage, especially if they're not sick, right? They're in quarantine, they should still be learning. So I think that that's so important, and really glad that you keyed in on it, because I think some may say, oh, well, the vaccines are coming out and maybe we don't really need to go this far. I think we need to stay on course and find a way to connect each and every student and each and every teacher, and doing it through its own process that you already have. And especially when there are schools that could, you know, easily open their Wi-Fi, it's really maybe a matter of just providing the device to a student is a really wonderful way to think about how to address this issue specifically. And I understand that schools know who's connected and who's not. So they may actually have more relevant information than, for instance, providers who are trying to sign up people in the emergency broadband benefit program, where I understand from our member companies working on the Keep Americans Connected pledge, even if they were providing a free service, it sometimes was really hard to find the low-income people who wanted the service and wanted to get connected. So that can, having the schools directly involved could really be helpful in addressing that gap.
Yep.
Well, so switching just a little bit from the adoption issues and broadband to deployments.
Mm-hmm.
We just saw the RDOF completed.
Uh-huh.
The long form process off. There's been a lot of debate in the public and now in the record on the results of the RDOF. You partially dissented on the RDOF for a number of reasons. One of them was about mapping and that the mapping had not been completed pursuant to the latest congressional act called the Broadband Data Act, and your concerns about sending out so much money without really knowing for certain if it's going to meet the need out in the field. So I wanted to talk to you about this next stage of the process. And I don't know if you've had a chance to kind of catch up with what's been going on in the record, but there are some people that are really scratching their heads. We have a significant congressional letter that was filed, over 150 members, including Majority Whip Clyburn, raising some concerns, but saying to the FCC, okay, guys, you really got to do your jobs here. You got to make sure in the long form process that these winning bidders can meet the obligations, that they have the technical and the management and the financial, the operational skills to do that. And then they also encourage the commission to have some kind of a public process. And the long form process isn't usually a public process. So just wondering, what are your thoughts about this? Any takeaways from your own perspective? I'm just throwing it out, just big open.
Yeah. Just to be clear, I partially approved RDOF as well, because as I previously mentioned, I am a Kansan, and so I do understand the need for the rural access piece that RDOF and high cost does. But you're exactly right, Angie, that I did specifically raise a number of things that I was objecting to in the way that RDOF was proceeding. And one of those, again, was the mapping issue. And one of those also was, as you mentioned at your generous opening, I am an enforcement and enforcement trained lawyer who also wrote an RDOF about making sure that we have an effective mechanism to make sure that we're able to hold folks accountable. And so I do understand why members of Congress have questions. The stakes are high. We are spending an enormous amount of ratepayer money, and communities have been waiting far too long for this broadband infrastructure, especially for folks to fall down. And so I do agree that the commission needs to have and conduct a rigorous long form application review. We require a lot of companies at the long form stage for good reasons. And so, as you mentioned, this is a live controversy here before me and before us. And so I don't want to prejudge, obviously, some of those reviews at this stage, even though there has been a frothy comment cycle already. But I'm going to be following this very closely. I could not agree more, Angie.
And then, we do have legislation that likely will get reintroduced, such as the Clyburn legislation, and that contemplates putting more money into deployment. Have you thought through the principles of further funding deployment of broadband, and what do you think is the right policy mechanisms in terms of addressing the needs? Just going to open that up to just an open question.
Yeah, as always, especially with the Whip's office, and I have a great working relationship with the Whip's office. The infrastructure piece is so clearly there. We need to move. I'm a Chiefs fan, as many of you know, and so I'm going to make a sports analogy here. We need to move with a hurry-up offense on a lot of ways, and that includes the rural access piece. Obviously, the Whip's legislation thinks through that. Again, there are a lot of folks that live in densely populated areas that are also having issues of disconnection, and a lot of those deal with affordability. We also need to make sure, especially now seniors remain disconnected in so many ways, and so making sure that there's also the education piece is extremely important. But the good news is that I have great hopes and expectations that continue to work with the whip's office, that the infrastructure side of this is something that Congress will also take up this term, and I look forward with anticipation to solving a lot of these issues, like I said, as quickly as possible.
That's great. And we at INCOMPAS too are really committed to working with everyone, both the Commission and the Hill, on ensuring that the money that's being invested is being invested smartly in infrastructure that's scalable and has some future proof and that can meet the needs, especially when we're making 10-year commitments. It's going to be able to meet the needs now and meet the needs and well into the future. So we think that that's just critical. Any thoughts about the mapping process? What's under the FCC? Just released a big order. So what's the timing on that look for? When do you think my broadband providers are going to be submitting their first set of maps?
Yes, with regard to mapping, for too long, consumers, states, cities, organizations have called on the FCC, to get its broadband data in order. And we've heard from households that, have the all too real but disappointing experience of looking at that broadband map that says their home should be served, is served, when they know that it's not. And so I was a strong supporter of the Broadband Data Act and widely acknowledged the flaws in our maps, as you mentioned, both for RDOF as well as for the 5G Mobility Fund. And the flaws that the maps were not being quickly addressed, the Act's strong direction and prioritization for some agency, and now that Congress has provided the funding for that mapping, including that significant startup cost of creating the fabric, I expect to see quick action. We have bipartisan agreement around the importance of getting our maps in order. I feel strongly that new maps must be completed, like I said, especially as we move from RDOF phase 1 into phase 2. And then obviously with regard to the 5G fund, I could not agree more as well. And to one of the points that you just mentioned, I have talked about making sure that future proof is part of that infrastructure package. Part of that, again, when you look historically, we paid a lot of good money to build out to 4.1. And so making sure that we are thinking through what that, especially with that 10-year commitment, as you mentioned, making sure we think through, what are going to be the needs going forward. And then also, as I mentioned in my remarks as well, affordability, especially during the pandemic where there's so much pain dispersed throughout the country, making sure that you have a lot of rural folks who need an affordable option as well. And so starting to think through and consider what that would look like, I think is also something that we need to continue to work for.
Great. Well, thank you, Commissioner. I know we had a hard stop and I'm kind of sad because I had a few more questions for you, but I want to give you the last word in case there was something you really wanted to say in addition to all the wonderful things you've already said, but we can't thank you enough for joining us again.
Well, I'm honored to be here. And the good news is, Angie, you and Chip and the INCOMPAS team know how to get to me. And no doubt we'll continue the dialogue. Keep up the great work, and to your members, again, glad that there are so many issues that we're going to be dealing with moving forward, from security and making sure that we have, the find it, fix it, fund it, and some of the rip and repair that we obviously see, but really, I am focused every day now, in particular, on this emergency broadband benefit. I think it is going to really help those struggling American households that we know for far too long have remained disconnected. And so look forward to the continuing dialogue and partnership, of course. So everyone, be safe, be well.
Thank you so much.